This is Aging Forward, a podcast from Mayo Clinic about the science behind healthy aging and longevity. Each episode, we explore new ways to take care of our long-term health, the health of our loved ones, and our community, so we can all live longer and better. I'm Dr. Christina Chen, a geriatrician and internist at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. In this episode, we are talking about how to improve our mental sharpness. Sometimes you just have those moments when an idea is on the tip of your tongue, or you walk into a room and immediately forget what you came for. Everyone experiences these moments, and some of us may find that we're experiencing them more as we get older. So how do we keep our brains sharp? And is mental decline unavoidable? Here to talk about that with us today is our guest, Dr. Therese Huston, author and cognitive scientist. She's the founding director of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning at Seattle University, and she is also coming out with a new book from Mayo Clinic Press called Sharp, 14 Simple Ways to Improve Your Life with Brain Science. So welcome, Therese. Thank you so much for having this conversation with us today.
It's a real treat to be here.
I know your book is not released yet, but I feel super lucky that I was able to get a sneak peek. And it's just so interesting and thoughtfully written. I can't wait for others to read it.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. I am proud of this book. It has helped me improve my life. It's made me mentally sharper. And I'm excited to share the tools with more people.
In your book, you address so many real world problems, and especially in this world that's so fast-paced and distracting. So I appreciate that this is written really not just for aging adults, but for all of us. How do we keep our minds sharp through all the chaos? And so tell us a little bit about this writing journey for you. Why was this book important to you, and what were you hoping to accomplish with it?
I wanted to accomplish a number of things. Part of the pull was to really make brain science accessible and to really dig into the research and present it to people in useful ways. Another part is that I'm aging myself. I just turned 56. And when I started doing the research for it about 5 years ago, already I was beginning to notice that things weren't as easy as they used to be. Certain aspects of memory, I felt more distracted. I would go to my phone to look up the weather and I would get pulled into another app. And then I would close my phone and realize, wait, I never checked the weather. That didn't happen 10 years ago. So what was changing? And I began to then dig into the research so that I could understand, is this normal cognitive changes with aging? And if so, can I stop it from happening? And so I had my own very deep personal motivation to begin to change my own cognitive world.
Yeah. And I love the name Sharp. It's so simple, yet there's such a complex undertone to that as well. And I was hoping, can you break that down for us in a more granular way? What does mentally sharp mean?
It's interesting because I think all of us have a sense when we're mentally sharp. We have days where we really feel it. And as a cognitive scientist, I think about mental sharpness as, do you have high cognitive flexibility? When you're trying to come up with a solution for something, can you only come up with one solution, or can you come up with multiple solutions, maybe novel solutions that you haven't even tried before? That would be a day when you're feeling particularly mentally sharp. Also, do you have good focus? Are you able to focus when you need to? And are you able to then relax and be perhaps daydreaming when you don't need to be mentally focused? If you're daydreaming all the time, then that's a sign that you're not as mentally sharp. And you remember the things that you want to remember. Maybe not in the moment. There might be a word that you struggled in the moment to recall, and then it comes to you an hour later. You're like, oh, that's the word I was looking for.
That's me all the time.
Or you see someone in a context that you're not used to seeing them in, and you can't come up with their name. That can be really frustrating. That's normal with aging, but we all want to be mentally sharp.
Let's move on to just the changes in the brain. How does a 50-year-old brain differ from a 25-year-old brain?
Our brains differ in a few dramatic ways. So I'll name 3 that are part of normal changes that would happen within a brain over that 25-year span. So first of all, you lose some myelin, and myelin is the white fatty coating on axons. It's called white matter, and that begins to deteriorate with age. That means that neurons don't communicate as quickly as they used to. And so over time, often by your 50s or 60s, you begin to think, things aren't coming to me as quickly as they used to. And that's part of normal aging. So that's one change. The other 2 big changes have to do with 2 brain areas that shrink over time. So one
Mhm.
area that shrinks over time is your hippocampus. And your hippocampus is crucial for forming new memories. It's crucial for storing new memories as well as retrieving memories. That can change because your hippocampus is shrinking. And it shrinks about 5% every decade
Mm.
after the age of 40. So you might not notice it at 40. You might start to notice it at 50. You're probably going to notice it at 60.
Mhm.
The other key brain area that changes and shrinks over time is your prefrontal cortex, beginning around age 40 or mid 40s. And again, it shrinks about 5% every decade.
Mm.
And your prefrontal cortex is important for working memory. When you're trying
Mhm.
to hold a phone number in mind, or you get an authorization code on your phone and you have to go and enter it somewhere and you're repeating it to yourself, that would be working memory. But also, that's important for planning, for multitasking, for decision making. That begins to go down because your prefrontal cortex is shrinking. Losing that mental real estate, that can hurt.
Yeah, so the brain is such a complex organ, it changes so much as we age. So, can you share with us the changes we may expect in a normal aging experience, whether it's behaviors or the way that we think, versus signs that something could be more serious?
So let's first talk about what you might normally expect that should be no cause for concern if it starts happening in your 50s or 60s. So, first of all, more tip of the tongue phenomena. So you're trying to think, what's that word that I know this word and it's not coming to me right now, but it comes to you later in a completely different context. And you suddenly turn to your partner and you blurt out the word. I knew it. I hadn't forgotten it. So that's the tip of the tongue phenomenon, and that's more common, and that's completely normal. Secondly, mild forgetfulness. So that experience, you walk out into the parking lot and you can't recall, wait, where did I park today? Right. And particularly if it's a new place, you're more likely to remember it. But if it's a place
Mhm.
you park all of the time, you're more likely to forget. And then it comes to you a few seconds later where your car is. That kind of mild forgetfulness is common with aging. And the
Mm.
third one is that multitasking becomes a lot harder. At least where I notice this is I love to cook and I'll be cooking a special dinner, one where I have to be closely following the recipe because I've never made it before. And my husband, who's excited to tell me a story, is telling me a complicated story. And I find myself thinking, wait, it's harder to do these two things at once. So multitasking becomes harder. We find ourselves needing to focus a bit more, and we don't have the resources to toggle back and forth between two things the way that it might have been easier a decade ago.
I'm smiling because this happens to me every day. And sometimes I wonder, is this because I'm doing things on more of an autopilot mode? Is it cognitive changes from aging, or is it just I'm just distracted and not really focusing on what's in front of me?
Exactly. One of the reasons it may be easier for a 20-year-old to remember where they parked is they haven't parked as many times.
That's true.
They've only got 4 years of parking experience under their belts. And sometimes I like to draw the analogy that a normal aging mind is like a library that
Mm,
becomes crowded with many books. A brand new library doesn't have that many books.
true.
On the other hand, there are things that you can look out for that should be causes of concern, either in your own life or in the lives of people that you care about.
Right.
So, one thing would be using the wrong words completely, right? So, if someone uses a word and you're talking with them, and you're like, that's not the word that you mean. So,
Mm,
word substitutions that make no sense, that would be a sign that there's something more serious going on. Being forgetful about things that are normally routine. If there's
mm,
something that's a normal routine for you and you can't remember the next steps, that would be a real concern. The third one would be you find yourself lost in familiar places.
mm,
It's one thing to travel to Istanbul for the first time and you're lost when you leave your hotel. That's normal. However, if you are at the mall and you want to go to your favorite store and you find yourself thinking, wait, where is it? I can't remember where that store
mm.
is. That would be a concern. So, those would be three things to take as concerning signs that you should talk with your doctor.
And those three things that you mentioned are kind of precursors for what will impact our independence and function as it potentially gets worse. So, good to know the difference between what's okay to kind of keep an eye on versus what's something to really start to look into.
Exactly. Yeah, we all want to maintain control and independence in our lives. So
Yeah,
early interventions can make a big difference if there is
right.
something concerning going on.
Absolutely.
With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
We talked a little bit earlier about 20-year-olds, how they don't have to worry about certain things, but I think there's a lot of value for them to understand what are some risk factors that we need to be thinking about now as early as possible, whether it's behaviors or environmental influences or general mindset or outlook on things that puts us at higher risk of losing mental acuity.
So, a few things. First of all, a sedentary lifestyle, that's a big risk factor. If you aren't getting out and going for walks, if you're not getting any aerobic exercise, chances of dementia, increased rate of cognitive decline goes way up if you're sedentary. Second is social isolation. For those elderly individuals who are socially isolated, the risk of dementia goes up by 50%.
Mm,
And so I like to combine those two, the activity and isolation. So think about potentially taking a dance class, right? That's something that combines physical activity as well as movement and socialization. If you're going to go for a walk, invite a friend, a sibling, and meet a neighbor that way or join a
mhm.
walking group. So those two are huge issues. And then we can get into other concerns such as diet, chronic stress, sleep. Losing even one night's sleep can lead to a drop in your memory abilities, but certainly
Right.
sleep has a huge impact on increasing your chances of dementia.
And I just love how your book has so many of these great tips for us to understand how we can be more proactive with these risk factors. So, what can we do? Let's talk about your book, Therese. You've provided so many great insights and strategies on how we can maintain our mental acuity for as long as possible. And one of them is focus. And you touched on that a little bit earlier, but can you tell us how aging impacts focus as a whole?
If you find yourself becoming more distracted as you get older, you're right, that is happening. I gave the example of you go to get on your phone for one thing and you become distracted, but there's good news and bad news with that. So the
Hmm.
bad news is as we age, we tend to find it harder to ignore external distractions. The good news is we find it easier to ignore internal distractions. So
Mm,
research indicates that people have less mind wandering, that they are able to stay the course in whatever they're focused on as they get older, they're able to stay focused on it as long as
mhm,
there aren't external distractions.
mm,
So for instance, if you're in a meeting and there's a conversation that's going on in the hallway, even if the door's closed, you might be really distracted by that. And you're feeling a little bit agitated, like, shouldn't we do something? Shouldn't we ask them to leave? Right? Whereas the 20 somethings and the 30 somethings in the room, they don't seem to care. But there is an interesting silver lining here. And that is that distractions can actually spur creativity. There have
Hmm.
been research studies finding that when older adults are compared with younger adults, if there are distractions present, older
Hmm.
adults can come up with more creative ideas because the distraction takes them in a new direction and they come up with an idea that because the younger adults are successfully ignoring and filtering out
Mm.
distractions altogether, they don't get that same sense of inspiration. So don't count yourself out as having lost it. Creativity can actually go up as we age.
Yeah, I love the section about creativity because I'm also driven by creativity. So I just find that so fascinating.
And I think it's important for some of the people that I know that work into their 60s, instead of retiring at 60 or 65, they continue to work. They'll sometimes count themselves out of having good ideas, they will let the younger people contribute all the ideas because they think, oh, they're more hip on technology or they're reading about the latest whatever. The
Yeah.
fact that one of the things that goes up over time is our big picture thinking
Mhm.
as well as our creativity. And so be sure to continue to contribute in those meetings. You perhaps see some things that other people in the room are missing. And so don't think that you're only going to be good at the execution side. You can be brilliant at the brainstorming side. So lean in, don't lean out.
Yeah. Do you have any other ideas on how we can maintain or increase our creativity?
So walking really helps. There are plenty of creative individuals historically that have walked, but now there's research indicating, and especially if you take a meandering walk as opposed to just walking the same path, you see a significant increase in creativity with as little as 1/5 of a mile. That's 500 steps?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a long walk, and you can come back to a problem that you were struggling with, and you might have some new creative ideas. Another is to watch funny video.
Those TikToks.
Exactly. Get on Instagram, get on TikTok, get on YouTube, find a funny video. What the research indicates there is so often when we're feeling pressure to be creative, particularly for work, we feel stressed. And when we feel
Mhm.
stressed, creativity goes down. The two do not work together well. So watching a funny video can reduce your stress level. It can reduce cortisol in the moment. So that's what they do in the lab. They show a 7-minute funny video, and then they give people a task to be creative, and creativity goes up.
And you mentioned stress levels. Is there a relationship between stress and mental sharpness?
Absolutely. The key issue there is probably cortisol.
Mm.
Cortisol gets a bad rap. Cortisol basically helps us get off the couch and act. It gets us to move. It gets us to take action. And
Yeah.
so short-term cortisol is very beneficial. It can actually increase your mental sharpness. If you're nervous about giving a presentation, cortisol can help you think on your feet. So short-term cortisol is good, but long-term chronic stress, long-term elevated cortisol levels lead to inflammation, makes it harder to think, interferes with sleep. You want cortisol to go up and then you want it to come back down.
How about the thinking on your feet? It takes a certain level of executive function to be able to think quickly and act quickly. How do we improve just thinking on our feet?
This is a tricky one, and that can be something that we feel that we're losing as we age, our ability to think quickly on our feet. We had a plan A and now we need to come up with plan B. And that can be frustrating because we really, really like plan A. Can't we go back to plan
Right.
A? The good news is that there are ways to increase your ability to think quickly on your feet. Exercise is one of the best ways to do that. And you actually want to increase your aerobic ability. You want to get your heart beating quickly, and that can improve your ability to think on your feet. So if you're about to go into a Zoom call or a meeting where you know you're going to be asked some questions and you're going to need to be able to think quickly, run up and down the stairs a few times. Now, that's not going to last for hours. If you're only doing something for a couple of minutes, it also has a short window of benefit. If you know that you're going to need to be thinking on your feet for the entire day, that's a day to take a good run or go do a spin class. Basically, the longer the aerobic activity, the longer the benefits are going to last in terms of your ability to think on your feet.
So if we want to think quick on our feet, we have to move our feet.
Oh, well said.
Quick way to remember that. Another big theme is learning new things, learning them quickly and hoping that they'll stick. Can you share some strategies on how we can improve the absorption of knowledge, memorizing new things, and reducing the chances of forgetting?
So we'll offer both short-term strategies as well as long-term strategies because
Okay.
there can be a situation where you know you're about to walk into a meeting and you know you're going to meet 6 or 7 new people and you want to get their names straight. This meeting matters. As well as there are long-term strategies that you can do in general where you just want to improve your memory. So let's first talk about the short term. 2 things immediately improve your memory short term. So one thing that you can do is to do a meditation. If you can do a meditation right before you walk into a situation where you know you're going to learn things and you want to be able to recall them, it improves recall by as much as 75%.
Hmm.
So a 10-minute mindfulness meditation, and there are various hypotheses as to why that is. It improves your focus, but it also seems to speed up your ability to grab new information and hold on to it. Another thing you can do is test yourself. And so I use this now in parking lots where
Okay.
once I've parked my car, as soon as for instance, when I walk into the gym, I ask myself, wait, where did I park my car? And I'm just testing myself. Oh, right. And I'll remember it every time I remember to do that little test. So the test doesn't have to be hard. It's just a matter of recalling the information a little distance from when you learned it. Likewise, if you're meeting people at a party or in a meeting, when you walk away from that person, ask yourself, wait, what was her name again? Oh, Christina. Right, got it. People often ask me, Therese, does it help to say the person's name out loud right away? You need a little bit more of a gap. It doesn't hurt to say their name right away, but what would be better is to step away from the situation. Or I'll often say, I'll walk away and then I'll say, oh, hey, so-and-so, have you met Christina? If you haven't met Christina, she does this. And I'm testing myself on what I learned about Christina.
Okay.
Long-term, meditators have better memory than people who don't meditate. And benefits seem to come after about 8 weeks of meditation. So even if you don't have a chance to meditate that day, if you've got a regular practice of doing at least 10 minutes of meditation a day, your memory will be better than people who don't. Taking a dance class. I mentioned that the hippocampus tends to shrink over time. And what they find is that for individuals over the age of 60 who take a 6-month dance class, they have more density of neurons in their hippocampus than individuals who don't sign up for a dance class but do some other physical activity. And the reason that they think dance is so effective is because you've got that physical component, you've got a memory component, you're learning new dance steps, plus there's a social component. And it's combining 3 things that often diminish with age. It doesn't matter what kind of dance, you actually get neurogenesis. You actually get new neurons in your hippocampus. It's one of the only places in the brain that can gain new neurons as we age.
The other fun strategy I remember reading about is the learn and scare one. I thought that was so funny, where you learn something and then get scared because it somehow retains it for you better. Can you elaborate on that?
So a nice thing about how our brains are wired is if we've just had an upsetting experience, you want to remember that, right? You want to remember the things that preceded the scary experience. This is a theory, at least. So you can avoid the scary experience in the future, right? And that makes a lot of sense. We don't want to put ourselves in threatening situations. And so when you have a frightening experience, you get a big dump of adrenaline, and that seems to help, as well as you get a big dump of the acetylcholine. These things will improve memory. So one of the things you can do if you've just left a situation where you want to remember what happened, watch a scary video. It will help you remember exactly what happened. And I think we can relate to this. I don't know about you, but I've had experiences where I've had a situation where I've had a meeting with my manager that was very threatening to me, right? Very upsetting. It wasn't necessarily scary like a scary movie, but she was telling me bad news that had real implications for my future. And I can remember the moments leading up to that scary moment, right? I can remember what she was wearing. I can remember where she was in her office. I mean, I remember details that I didn't even think I was paying attention to. But what I don't remember is I don't remember walking back to my office. And so here's what's fascinating. When you're feeling threatened, what you'll remember are the things that preceded feeling threatened and scared. You won't remember things that followed being threatened and scared. And so beforehand, you meditate. Afterwards, watch the scary movie.
I'm just getting so many ideas. I'm laughing right now because I'm getting these ideas of how to help my husband remember better.
Oh my.
And so if I tell him to do something, he forgets, maybe I'll just like jump scare him or yell in his ear or something. I might just have to try that. Another really meaningful aspect of your book is just your dedication to helping us understand the importance of our brain being nourished. Right? Relating with other people, showing empathy, managing stress, particularly the empathy part as we get older. I feel like, we kind of care less. Is there a physiologic explanation for that? Just the empathy part?
It's interesting. So there are 2 kinds of empathy that psychologists seem to agree upon. And that is there's emotional empathy and cognitive empathy. Emotional empathy is feeling what other people feel, or having a deep sense of what someone else is feeling. And parents especially will say that when their child is in pain, they're in pain, right? It's unbearable for them to see their child in pain.
Yeah.
Likewise, you might have had this experience with a pet. When your pet's in pain, you feel incredible pain for them. And that would be emotional empathy. The good news is emotional empathy tends to increase with age. So this is one of the bright spots of aging, is we can feel more of what other people are feeling. Cognitive empathy, however, tends to go down. So what is cognitive empathy? Cognitive empathy is perspective taking.
Hmm.
Can I see the way you're seeing this problem? Let's say a friend of yours, roughly the same age, has been dating someone for 3 months and they decide they're going to move in with this person. And you're thinking, what? You are crazy. Why on earth? You've only known this person for 3 months. Whereas your 20-year-old self might have thought, well, that's a little strange, but I get it. I see why you would want to move in with them. And
Yeah.
that's not just a matter of becoming more afraid of danger as you get older. What tends to happen is we find it harder to take another person's perspective as
Mm.
we get older. So it's easy to relate to their feelings. In the case of if a friend of yours is going to be moving in with someone they just started dating, try to connect with their emotions. Maybe they're feeling incredibly lonely. And if they start expressing their loneliness, now you'll be able to connect with them because emotions are easier to share, whereas it can be harder to see the world from their perspective. So
Yeah.
cognitive empathy goes down, emotional empathy goes up. As to the brain mechanisms of that, it's not very clear yet. We know that the amygdala tends to be less reactive as we get older. So that could
Yeah.
be part of it. On the one hand, it can be good. There are probably 20-year-olds in your life who make a big deal out of everything. And as you get older, you're just like, why are you making such a big deal out of it? The
Mhm.
amygdala is very reactive when we're young. It's less reactive as we get older, which can be wonderful.
Interesting.
That's one of the other benefits. Things bother you less as you get older.
There's two more things I'd like to talk about. The first is pain, which affects physically how we feel, but emotionally too. And I have many patients who live with chronic pain every day and influences how they think. How can we change our relationship with pain?
This was for me one of the game changers in my life personally, was to do the research for this chapter. So it may be a game changer for your listeners as well. And that is, you want to find a doctor you like and trust. Now, there's fascinating research that when individuals have a doctor, particularly their primary care physician, the person that they see most often, if they find that person both warm and credible, they feel actually less pain following subsequent visits to that doctor.
Oh,
Medications will be more effective for them. Part of it's adherence. They're more likely to follow their instructions. But they've actually done lab tests where they've pricked a person's skin and given them a histamine. So you're going to have an allergic reaction to that histamine once it's under your skin.
mhm.
And basically, then they have a healthcare provider provide them with a lotion that is basically just like Jergens. It's not really going to help.
Mhm.
But they basically, first of all, they tell them that it's either going to help or that it's a neutral lotion. And if they're told that it's going to help, then sure enough, it reduces the size of the bump. But what's really fascinating here is the competence of the doctor who administers it. Does the doctor drop things when they come into the office? Do they use a lot of filler words? Do they keep saying, Do they make mistakes? Do they put the blood pressure cuff on wrong? If they make a lot of mistakes, you actually get a bigger welt than if you have a competent doctor. This seems like, how on earth could the allergic reaction depend on competence of your doctor? But it's at that level that a placebo effect can take place. Our interpretation of this person's competence influences whether or not the care they're giving us actually leads to improvement.
Interesting.
And likewise, the warmth of the doctor. Does the doctor smile? Do they spend all the time looking at the computer and the chart, or do they make eye contact? That also affects the size of the welt. And so this has led to a big change in my life. I had a primary care physician for years who would forget things. Like between the beginning of the appointment and the end of the appointment, he would often forget why I was there. And for years, I was just always like, oh, but it's easy to get. I can always get an appointment, and that might be because he makes so many mistakes, right? That he doesn't have many patients. There were other things I liked about him, but he was often making mistakes. And doing the research for that chapter convinced me I need to find a doctor who I find incredibly competent. And I now have one. And She's harder to get in with an appointment, but that's okay. I can always go to urgent care if I need to see someone same day. But I now have a doctor who I trust, and the research is clear on this. You'll have less pain as well as treatments will be more effective if you have a doctor who's warm and competent.
Yeah. As we conclude our podcast today, we'd like to get to know the expert. And our question for you is, how do you personally age well? And what does aging forward mean to you?
For me, in researching this book, there have been a number of things that I find are allowing me to age well. One thing is I drink 3 cups of green tea every morning now. There's fascinating research that tea in general has many health benefits, but green tea in particular, with all the polyphenols, the L-theanine plus caffeine, there's multiple layers of phytochemicals that are so beneficial. It improves your focus. People who drink 3 cups of green tea as they age are more mentally sharp, have fewer memory problems as they age. I now meditate daily. That's one way that I find that I'm aging well. And I make sure that I go for a brisk walk every morning. I find it provides real mental clarity, probably improves my creativity, but also it gets me out and I get a chance to see my neighbors, right? That social component.
You know, I'd like to actually start a new tradition today. I think it'd be neat if you could think of a question you would like to ask our listeners. And this is me being creative here. What is a thought that they can hang on to as an empowerment to get them in the direction of feeling more sharp? What's a question you'd like to ask our listeners today?
I would ask them to think back over the past week. When did you feel the most mentally sharp? And take a moment to think, what were you doing that day in the moments leading up to feeling so mentally sharp? Because I think we can all identify moments where we felt sharper. And if we can identify our own best practices, we can go back. Maybe we only did it once this week, but now that's something that we were able to fit into our busy schedules once. Build it into your busy schedule more often.
Love it. Thank you so much for this conversation today. I learned so much, and I hope all of our listeners have as well. And so thank you for sharing all this great knowledge, ideas, not to just sharpen our minds, but really to live our best lives.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chen. You make life better.
On the next episode of Aging Forward, menopause and sexual wellness for the aging woman.
This is the thing that really bothers women a lot. You know, they're getting that weight. And we tell them that aging collides with menopause. So you're having to do more, eat less to stay the same. But then you have this weight that comes around the tummy.
So that's all for this episode. Hopefully you're feeling a little bit more informed, inspired, and empowered. If you'd like to learn more about Dr. Huston's new book, Sharp, 14 Simple Ways to Improve Your Life with Brain Science, check out the show notes online for more information. If you have a topic suggestion for a future episode, you can leave us a voicemail at 507-538-6272, and we might even feature your voice on the show. For more Aging Forward episodes and resources, head to mayoclinic.org/agingforward. And if you found this show helpful, please subscribe and make sure to rate and review us on your podcast app. It really helps others find our show. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay curious and stay active.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as medical or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified healthcare provider for any medical questions. The appearance of any guest does not imply an endorsement of them, their employer, or any entity they represent. The views and opinions are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of Mayo Clinic. Reference to any product, service, or entity does not constitute an endorsement of or recommendation by Mayo Clinic.